Good morning, everyone. It's a rainy morning in Johannesburg, and I have the pleasure this morning of chatting with Busisekile Khumalo, the author of the Harvard Wife series and lots more other books. But today, our conversation is going to be about Rubies and Rain. And I am Sue Nyathi, and you probably have read my books as well. Yeah, but today is not about me, it's about Ubusi and Rubies and Rain. And yeah, so before I launch into the conversation, I just want to introduce Ubusi. Wusi has a catalog of fiction. I like to call her a serial writer and a serial thriller because I think that best is what best describes her work. And she has plenty of books. She's written plenty of books, and I always wonder how she does it. So amongst her titles are Fallen Candle, Noma Swazi, her Silent Scream series, and the Sunshine and Shadow series. And today we are going to focus on that series, and we're going to look at the second book. I think it's your 9th book, Busi, am I correct? 10th, wow. Yeah, so let me just hand over to Busi and just ask you to introduce yourself. I always think the author always does a better job of introducing themselves.
I think you did a wonderful job because I always struggle. My name is Busisekile Khumalo. As Sue said, I like writing. Apparently, I have a lot to say. I had a lot to say when I was a kid, and I still have a lot to say now. Rubies and Rain is my 10th book, and I studied law at the University of Zimbabwe, which features in a lot in Sunshine and Shadows, the series. But I'm a full-time author, mother, humanitarian, and a social media enthusiast.
I can definitely attest to that. I've seen your videos on TikTok, and and you've got quite a huge following on Facebook. So yeah, I think you're more than just a social media enthusiast. So Busi, before we jump into the book Rubies and Rain, I just want you to talk a little bit about your writing process. I mean, how are you able to churn out all these books? It seems like you drop a book every year.
I'm actually about to drop the 11th this year. But I think I have insomnia. I suffer from insomnia, so I don't sleep. I call it my witching hour from anytime from 12 to 6 a.m. While everyone else is sleeping, my mind is just running amok, and I'm there on my phone writing. And that's how I've managed to write so many books, because I started publishing The Harvard Wife in 2017, and now we're in 2025. So yeah, 10 books from then to there. It's a lot. I also do have a blog on Facebook, and I think the readers, they are always like, what happens next? What happens next? So I now have sort of I used to write almost every day, although I'm trying out sleeping more, so I've reduced the number of pages that I write, which is bad for the readers, but good for my mental health and my health in general. So yeah, that's my writing process. Mostly when my mind is a bit all over the place, writing calms me down.
Oh, that's excellent. So you're basically an owl or a morning owl.
Yes.
And you use the mornings. I think I used to write in the mornings because I used to find it also quite peaceful and no disturbance. But I think as I get older, sleep has gotten the better of me. You sleep better, I think, with age. We'll see. So you can look forward to that.
I can look forward to that.
So in Rubies and Rain, we first actually meet, your vivacious character Vimbai. In the prequel, in Sunshine and Shadows. I don't know if people need to read it, Sunshine and Shadows, or can they just jump into Rubies and Rain, or would you recommend they do?
I would recommend they read Sunshine and Shadows first, because I have been interacting with some of the readers, and someone was like, I didn't know it was a series, so she started with Rubies and Rain, and she got a bit confused. Because at times we do reference things that happen in Sunshine and Shadows. So for the best, I'd say read Sunshine and Shadows first and then read Rubies and Rain. They can be read as standalone, but for the best experience, I'd say read Sunshine first so that it flows, because Rubies and Rain starts immediately where Sunshine and Shadows ends. So yeah.
No, that's so true. And, like I said, Busi is a serial thriller, so you really have to watch season 1. And season 1, unfortunately, is Sunshine and Shadows. So in season 1 in Sunshine and Shadows, we meet the vivacious Vimbai, who's a lawyer by profession. And I think, Busi, you alluded to the fact that you also studied law. So is the character Vimbai modeled on your own character, or your person? Well, I wouldn't say personality, but like your own experiences in terms of studying law at UZ.
She's actually modeled on my friend Vimbai, who I studied with at the University of Zimbabwe. So Vimbai, we started together, and then she dared me to write a book that was, the sexiest, most thrilling book. And I was like, only if you allow me to make you the main character. She was like, okay. So I sort of mirrored a bit of Vimbai, how she is. Vimbai is very loving. She loves people. She's always out there. But the funniest thing happened. I think I wrote the book, and when I was done, and after she read it, she was like, Busi, there are some things you wrote here which are about my life, but I never told you about. I was like, huh? She was like, yeah, there's some things that you... I was like, oh. She was like, when you talk about shadow, I did date an older guy at some point. I was like, oh, you never told me. So it was very funny to sort of have that conversation where I wasn't really mirroring her life, but in the end I did, sort of. So yeah, it wasn't about me, it's about Vimbai. And of course, I do put in some of my experiences from the university life, the way I would see men poach on those young girls, the cars stopping there. We're called fresh meat. When you're in part 1, you're called fresh meat.
Yeah, I know the predatory culture is still very prevalent, whether it's, in UZ or at UJ, you see it all, everywhere. And it's interesting to me because in Sunshine and Shadows, we are in Harare, which is called the Sunshine City, incidentally, as well. And then in the sequel, you move us through several cities, from African cities and to European cities, and we even end up in Australia. So why do we see the shift in location with this Rubies and Rain?
I think because in Rubies and Rain, their lifestyle sort of has caught up with them, and now they are fugitives of the law, fugitives running away from a system that used to benefit them. And it really does mirror a lot of Zimbabweans, because a lot of us, we start in Zimbabwe, and then when it gets too much, we run, which is not necessarily a good thing, but I think it's out of necessity. It's a survival. Sort of, yeah.
Kind of survival of the fittest. But you also need to also have the means,
Yes.
and the access. I mean, I also find that, through this movement as well, we have a more racier plot in the second book. It's almost like, it kind of reminds me of Sidney Sheldon's novels, where you have location unknown, and you like literally speeding through different cities. And that really, I think for readers, encapsulates in what the pace of this book is. It's fast paced and it's quite racy. And like you allude to, privilege permeates this book, whether it's pretty privilege or political privilege. Why was it important for you to highlight this in Rubies and Rain?
I think because there's a lot of narrative about Zimbabwe that is out there about our struggles, because a lot of times when people write, they write about the everyday person, the poor people, but in that poverty, there are other people who are benefiting from that poverty. And those are those who are, politically inclined. We see them living these lives, we see them going to Mauritius just for tea or just for breakfast. They have these lives that we really are not privy to. So when I set out to show people Zimbabwe, I wanted them to see everything. I wanted them to see the sunshine, the shadows, the rubies in the mud and the rain, everything.
And I like that the book opens with this, sort of quote that says, "Rain didn't make things messy. People did that all on their own," by Barbara Delinsky. what were you alluding to? Well, without giving too much away of the plot.
Oh, yeah. I think I was giving away to the fact that in as much as Ruby finds herself in this situation, where she's now in a prison cell, where she doesn't have a partner or whatever, a lot of what she's going through, she actually did it to herself. Even though she didn't know what her father did, she had no problem enjoying the privilege that came with being the father of a kingmaker. She enjoyed the best schools, she enjoyed all this money, all this wealth, all this privilege, all those connections. And what happens when those connections that you've made, or when it becomes messy, we blame the situation, but when you look at it, you have to stop and see I'm part of this mess.
So I noticed that in your book, the women in your book have a lot of sexual agency. Like we see when Nosihle and the Mountain and Vimbai as well. I mean, especially we see it a lot with Vimbai in the prequel in Sunshine and Shadows. And I want to talk about that more. I mean, but in this book, we see women, having little political agency. So they have a lot of sexual agency, but very little political agency, and are used as pawns in settling scores. Was that intentional?
I think it wasn't intentional, but when I wrote this book, I think it was following around the time when those three ministers, opposition ministers, I won't name them, were abducted. And then after that, they claimed being abducted and they were sexually, abused and everything for, protesting or whatever. And then the state later arrested them for false claims. And I think one of them ended up actually going through a mental breakdown. And so when I was writing the book, that was happening. And it sort of did influence the story a bit, because I did mention or mirror it a bit, but also the fact that I see a lot of women, especially those of the big men in Zimbabwe.
The chefs.
Yes, the chefs, when the chef is going down, usually it's the woman who suffers, or, the public humiliation that some of these women go through. And people just look away. Like even on Twitter, when you see the rhetoric, when people are talking about it, it's as if they're pawns, as if they're just, the agency is not there. And in as much as I'll gave those women the agency, especially Vimbai, the agency to be bold in her body, to, take what she wants. But then there are some things which are still done to her, even though she has this agency, she can only do so much. And
she has little control, yes, basically, of the bigger, circumstances, or, that, surround her. Yeah. And I think we have seen a lot of it play out in Zimbabwe. I think you see a lot of the times where women, as long as, they're close to power, yes, your proximity to power determines your position.
Yes.
But immediately when you're removed, from that proximity, your circumstances can change,
Yes. And then you are ridiculed for it. You are, you're ashamed for it. And it's really sad.
Yeah, and I like how you portrayed that in the book, and you really show it explicitly how that really happens, and how your fate can actually change overnight. And, in the opening of Rubies and Rain, we are quickly thrust into the prisons of Harare. And like you pointed out that, you were influenced by the politics of the time and what was happening with the abductions. And so we have this, the plot, opening and playing out largely in Harare Central Prison, which kind of reminded me of Bettina Gapa's book. I don't know if you ever read it, The Book of Memory, which also takes place in Chikurubi Prison. So why was it important for you to spotlight the life in prisons, in Zimbabwean prisons?
Because I remember when I was studying humanitarian law, which was third year or fourth year, yeah. But basically, our lecturer then, Mr. Chimga, I failed to say his name, but it's Zimbabwe, yeah. Chimga, mm-hmm. But yes, he was talking about the conditions in prison, and we had also Professor Maduku, who would always, tell us the stories of his time when he was arrested, and it really it stayed with me. The fact that I wondered what was happening during COVID, to those women, because those prisons are known for being unsanitary. So I'm wondering what happens as a woman there, because you need, sanitary pads, you need sanitary towels. What are the conditions like? And so I was highlighting, because it's also a part of a human rights infringement, and people are just turning a blind eye. I think we've normalized it to a point, and it's not right. And I remember we had this conversation before with Sunshine and Shadows, where I was like, no, I didn't set out to be an activist in these books, but somehow it just came out. So I think, yes.
And it's also quite interesting that prison conditions for black women haven't changed. I mean, I'm doing some research on a book, and a woman is incarcerated in Rhodesia, a black woman, together with her daughter. And this is nonfiction. So, and she's, recounting the prison conditions. This is like in the 1960s, and it's the same things, filthy, no food, and she's in prison with her daughter, and she's breastfeeding, and there's no water for her to even wash. So it's actually quite interesting how things haven't changed over the years. And other women actually then, white women incidentally actually rallied for her release, because they were saying she's, how can you keep women in such conditions? So it's actually quite an interesting reflection that life in prisons still, hasn't really changed.
It hasn't.
And so, it leads me to my next question in terms of, this book. Unlike your other books, Busi, in this book you have really moved a lot to Zimbabwe, and you give a lot of social commentary and political commentary. Why now? Why? I think in all your other books you've kind of shied away from Zimbabwe.
Yes. I think I was so afraid, because I grew up in fear. I was a very vocal child growing up, and my mother was a strict Ndebele woman. She'll be like, "Uzanyamalala, you'll disappear," because when we were growing up, people were disappearing, and unfortunately, they are still disappearing. And so, also being, I think, in South Africa, and seeing people stand up and seeing people talk about what is happening sort of made me stop and reflect and say, you know what, I can't be reflecting about everything that is happening all over Africa and shy away. I have to face those demons. I have to really say it, because tomorrow my daughter is going to grow up, and I want her to know exactly, even if we never stay there full time, it's still home. And if I don't say it, who will?
And it's true. So there's a time, I think, in everyone's life where, you have to speak truth to power, I suppose, and as they call it. And I think your fear is not unwarranted, but because we've seen it. Even now, the editor of a certain newspaper has been she was in prison, I think, but she's out on bail for writing a piece. Even it was a satirical piece. So, there is a certain level of, we don't, as a writer, there's a real threat of writing, what you feel and speaking truth to power. And so it also takes courage. But like you're saying, at some point, you cannot just be oblivious and sit and ignore it. You are called a romance writer, a romance novelist. But I feel like, I don't know, especially with this book, I feel like as if this book is more than just a romance novel. The stakes are higher. We have a racier plot. There's espionage, murder, and political intrigue. It's action-packed. And I would prefer to call it a political thriller, do you think you've been boxed in in the romance genre?
I think people can't really find the right box to put me in, so they...
or maybe there's no box.
Yes. I feel like because there's sex, then sex does not equate romance. I think that's one thing that people don't understand, because there's really no happy ending in my books, most of them. I think the only solid romance that I've written is Nomaswazi. Okay. Otherwise, the others are more drama, and as you say, this one was more of a political thriller. But also, I want to portray these things in a way that I want my people to read and enjoy, in a language that will, and what do people enjoy? Love, and love is there in war. love is there in, so I understand why they would say it's romance, but it's really not. And I think I don't have a box, and I don't want to be put in a box.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And maybe this could be your way of spreading yourself, beyond just being the romance novelist. Although I would have to say that your books are very sexy. I mean, let's not run away from that.
Yes, they are.
You've earned your reputation as the queen of steamy sex and scenes. And I always wonder, Busi, I mean, how do you maintain that momentum of having a lot of sex scenes but keeping it fresh, new every time in every book?
I think I write what I would like to read, you know, and I love romance. I love smart. I love dark romance. But the thing that excites me most about a book is that the sex has to be placed just right, you know, not just putting it in just to fill, a sport or whatever. It has to be a build up, I can feel the tension, I can feel, and so that's how I write as well. And I don't just put sex scenes just randomly. If you notice, there are times when, especially with Nosihle, she had more sexy time this time around because Ruby and Vimbai were going through it. So when it was now too much for those, I was like, okay, let me give people a rest. Okay, let's go to Nosihle. Oh, and then when you're just relaxing, boom, we're back there. And it's like, okay. So it's sort of, at times, yes, I use it to just give people relief. But also, I think because it always shocks me how people want to shy away from sex, especially Africans, considering that our population it's obvious people are having sex. So why aren't we free to write about it? And so I think I enjoy sex and I'm not afraid to write it, but I can't really say I am a smart writer, or I think there should be a balance somewhere.
Yeah. No, I think I like your technique when you say, especially with this book, you bring it in to give relief to the readers, which I think is a great technique and a way of looking at it, and that you are very intentional in how you place your scenes. It's actually even more interesting for me in this book that there's a shift from your heterosexual to the bisexual. So what kind of inspired that transition in sexuality?
Because we can't talk about human rights violations in Zimbabwe without talking about or acknowledging the hate that homosexuality gets. And it's something that really was very outspoken by our former president. I'm not sure about the current one, where he stands, but I think it really hasn't been a shift there. And I have friends whom I know, but they don't really live it out loud. I remember the one friend actually told me, he was so shy about it. But I'd known for so long because I knew him and I knew what he was. But when he came out, and now when other people ask me, I have to lie about it to protect him, And I feel like that's a shitty way to live. And so when we look at Zimbabwe, we have to look at it in its whole. Yes, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful country. It has so many resources. It has such potential. But it is a tyranny, and it affects people, And when we're looking at the vulnerable, it's not just women, it's not just children, it's the homosexuals. It's, there are certain parts. And so I was bringing that in. And also I feel like when people look at sexuality, or we can't say you have agency, yet you can't choose who you want to be with.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, I think as a society, Zimbabweans are very homophobic.
Yes.
And there's a lot of misogyny. And I see that played out a lot in social media, and I think you try to capture a lot of that hate.
Yes.
I think you captured it well as well in just getting the strands. And I don't know, what do you think could help us, in becoming more tolerant? I mean, we have this mantle as a Christian nation, yet there's this, lack of tolerance.
Yes. And I feel like it's very ironic because Christianity is supposed to be founded on love, the love that God had for all his children. And when we choose and pick to say, no, he will only love you if you do this because it makes you comfortable, We don't talk about those pastors who are sleeping with 7-year-olds. We don't talk about it. If we're saying we are so intolerant as a Christian, why are we allowing those grown men to marry 13-year-olds, And so it's now a matter of, I don't really know what can help, but I can maybe, if I speak it and someone reads it and feel maybe braver to actually say, okay, this is who I am. Or and we do find some people actually go out of Zimbabwe so that they can truly live who they are, We have Abondo Isile, there's influencers, and would he have been as free being like that when he was back home, And I don't really think there's a solution. I don't know if there's a solution, but I think turning a blind eye is not helping.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So what kind of emotional response are you hoping to elicit with this new book?
I think one of course, there are some very heavy themes in the book and some triggers as well. But I hope for empathy and understanding, when a lot of people say, why don't Zimbabweans go back? Why aren't they fighting? Why aren't they, I hope when they read this book, they understand. Yes, we are afraid, but our fear is not unfounded, It's not because they're like, no, but people have to die, but people have been dying. They have been dying, and it hasn't changed, And so it's a matter of, do you want to be a hero or do you want to be alive? Do you want your children to have a father and a mother, And to also see that the situation is the way it is because people are benefiting from what is happening, And and I don't think it's a matter of just changing one president for the next. It's a matter of a whole systematic change, And I think I'll delve that mostly into book 3,
Oh, so there's a book 3 coming up.
If I start writing. I haven't started writing it. I have to, but so
because you hint at it. I mean, you love these cliffhanger endings, and I think with Joshua, the ending alludes to something.
Yes.
A new installment.
So I was supposed to be writing it, but then because it sort of colludes with the other world, so it colludes with Daniel from the Harvard Wife. So that's why I had to bring out his baby maker, which is the 11th book that I'm working on now, before the 3rd installment of this one, because we actually see Joshua in his baby maker, and Chef in his baby maker. So it's the build up to the 3rd book, and also the revolution.
So you'd advise readers to also read the Harvard series, I guess, because I mean there's this like intertwining of these series, and
they do. So I think for you to enjoy the Busisekile, so it's now a thing. It's now the Busisekile Khumalo universe, because I've built this world where these characters keep combining and meeting, and it's not just isolated. It's now intentional. So I would say read The Harvard Wife, and you will love. I enjoyed it when I was writing it. I was like, oh, this is so cool. And I was telling my brother, I was like so excited to say, oh, they're making so much magic together. And I would never have thought that Joshua would have something in common with Daniel, But also, when we look at the coup, that was not the coup, It was rumored that they had help from a South African minister, And so I was like, oh, I have a South African minister. So, yeah.
And so this it's coming together nicely, and it's actually quite nice, because I don't think you planned it that way.
No.
But it's as the world of writing, things plots entangle.
Yes.
And it becomes more plotty and more racier.
Entanglement.
No, thank you so much, Busi, for this, intriguing insight into your world of writing. And, as we close, I just want to know who's your perfect reader?
Perfect reader.
Who do you want to pick up your books when you write? Who do you imagine reading? Who's that audience for your books?
African women.
African women.
And I know that men also read it, but most importantly, African women, because I feel like once you have a reading, women are readers, then it means their children will be readers too. Then it means tomorrow is safe, because I love African women so, so much. And these are just my love letters to them, basically, And I think the one thing that clinched writing as a career for me, because when I wrote The Harvard Wife, I was just hoping it will softly lead me towards law, But when I wrote Nomaswazi, and I had these women coming to me and be like, how did you know? I used to cut myself and no one actually describes it the way that you do. It's like you see me. It's like you were there. And so for me, it clinched that, what, I want African women to feel seen. I want them to pick up my book and see themselves, see their faces, see their struggles, see their triumphs, and see, their pain, everything. I want them to see themselves. So my perfect reader is an African woman, and it doesn't matter whether you're black, white, Indian, you're young, you're old. Young, no.
Age restriction.
Age restriction. Although I started reading at a very young age books that I shouldn't have been reading, but maybe young, let's say 16. Okay, yeah, from young 16 to but really every African woman, one story at a time.
Okay, thank you so much, Busi. I think you're a gift to the African woman, and may she pick up your books and find so much pleasure. And not just pleasure, but also you educate and empower women through your books, even in issues of mental health, sexual repression, oppression, and you go where a lot of writers don't go. And so we thank you for your time. We also thank you, Pagecast, for this feature. Thank you, Kwela Books, for publishing Busi. And we thank you all for listening to us.
And thank you, Sue, for this. I was enjoying the question so much. I didn't want it to end. I was like, there's questions. So thank you, Sue.
No, it's a pleasure. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But please do pick up a copy of Rubies and Rain. But before you do, you might want to read Sunshine and Shadows. It's an amazing book. I loved it. Busi never disappoints. Thank you.